Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast with your host, Gui Costin. The goal of this podcast is to give listeners a unique look into sales strategies from top industry executives. We introduce you to the heads of sales and heads of distribution who will help you understand the inner workings of the successful sales organizations from philosophy to execution. This podcast is essential for sales professionals seeking wisdom from the best in the field. If you're not familiar with Dakota and their Dakota Rainmaker content, please check out dakota.com to learn more about their services.
This episode is brought to you by Dakota Marketplace. Are you tired of constantly jumping between multiple databases and channels to find the right investment opportunities? Introducing Dakota Marketplace, the comprehensive institutional and intermediate database built by fundraisers for fundraisers. With Dakota Marketplace, you'll have access to all channels and asset classes in one place, saving you time and streamlining your fundraising process. Say goodbye to the frustration of searching through multiple databases, websites, Form ADVs, and say hello to a seamless and efficient fundraising experience. Sign up now and see the difference Dakota Marketplace can make for you. Visit dakota.com/Dakota-Marketplace today. Welcome everybody to the Rainmaker Podcast. Gui Costin, founder, CEO of Dakota. I'm joined by Steve Ford, Managing Director at GQG Partners. Steve, welcome.
Thanks, Gui. Good to be here.
Thrilled to have you here. So, as you all know, we know different distribution heads and things that we don't really get to in casual conversation. If we're playing golf, having dinner, having a drink at a conference, we're not talking really sort of beneath the surface of all things distribution, best practices, really how we conduct our business. I mean, I've known friends for 20 years where we interview on this podcast, hadn't really ever talked to this level of depth, and it's around best practices. And there's no conferences that we can go to, right? There's nothing like that. And, Steve, having known you for a little while, you were one of the first adopters, if you will, of Dakota Marketplace. And we shared in our Bryn Mawr office, went through a lot of sales, leadership, process, everything. And I was so impressed. I was like, who else would we want to have on the show than yourself? So thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thank you. And like the partnership has been real between the two firms, and been a big fan of what you guys are doing.
Steve is a managing director of global distribution. He leads the firm's global distribution effort with over 20 years of industry experience. Before he joined GQG Partners, Steve was a managing director at Pacific Current Group. In this role, he worked with founders of GQG Partners to develop and implement the firm's institutional business development strategy. Steve has held positions at Northern Lights Capital Group, Ridex Investments, and Strong Investments. Steve earned his BS in administration from Westminster College. He's a CAIA charter holder and holds a Series 7, 24, and 63 licenses. Full disclosure, my mentor does work for Steve, Pete Moran's.
Pete has forgotten more about this business than I could hope to know.
He taught me the business in 2001, and I'll never forget that. So he's been the best. He got me on the right track. So I'm very, very grateful. So thrilled to have you. Would you mind, could you just give just a little background on yourself and your career?
Yeah. The starting point is I kind of grew up in a very small town. So I'm from the Ozarks, if you're a fan of the Netflix show.
Yeah, of course.
I say that the real life Langamores are like my second cousins or something like that. But
so it's real.
Oh yeah. I think it's a pretty fair depiction of like the locals and all that. There's not a lot of Jason Bateman characters running around, but the rest of it is pretty good. And that was the fancy part of the Ozarks too, by the way. But I've always been in this business. This is all I've ever done. I was originally kind of trained on the advisor side of the business, wholesaling, if you will. I did that for 6 years, and then spent really the bulk of my career focused on kind of institutional, so classic endowment foundation, pension, consultants, and that kind of things. And today at GQG, I lead our total client-facing effort across both channels, and really focus on everything.
Well, that's great. And you're really big into sales process. And before we get to that, because it's one thing that I really enjoyed, and my personal belief is that these jobs are, can get kind of weird, especially as you get older. You know what I mean? But if you actually, because you guys have had a great run at GQG, but even outside of that, what I've been so impressed by is you've put such strict sales process in place, despite being on an amazing investment team. Can you just talk a little about how your team is structured?
Yeah, so we we have a multi-channel approach to what we do. So we have two distinct teams. So there's roughly a 10-person institutional team focusing on really true classic institutional sales and client service. And then there's another group that we call intermediary or advisor sales. And that's roughly a 20-person team. So part of that is focused on the kind of national accounts, gatekeeper level of what we do. And then we've got 9 field territories partnered up with junior salespeople in our office from a desk. And all of it is process driven. As the way I think about this is GQG is a machine, and nobody is bigger than the machine, including me. And so all of us can thrive in that and be wildly successful, but there is a process to how the machine works, and everybody can evolve that and make that better as we go. But ultimately, you have to figure out how to fit in the machine too.
But there's some level of brilliance, and I mean this in all sincerity, around understanding that you're on like a rocket ship, right? Mm-hmm. But instead of just taking that for granted and just being like, ooh, we're just, it's going great, you've put an insane amount of structure in place within the business.
Well, if you think about it, look, we've been wildly fortunate to have the success that we've had, both in terms of investment success and commercial success. Because of that, it's be incredibly easy for me to confuse a salesperson with very good results that is actually mediocre.
Right.
And I view this as a great privilege to do what we get to do, both for ourselves and for our clients. And so I just have a culture of very high standards. And so the process is really what I think is the minimum to meet the standards.
Right.
And people that are fit under that, it's really, I want to help you be more successful and find the right fit for you. And if that's not GQG, that's okay. But usually we can figure out how to get people successful in our process and go on to do really great things.
I want to talk more about process, but talk about that concept of the culture that you have in your distribution efforts, and then people who just kind of have to raise their hand eventually, despite how much you try to help them, and they're just like, look, I'm probably going to be better off at another place. Meaning, Have you found in doing this that you end up just finding cultural fits? People, let's say they're all equal in terms of nice people, hard work, and all that.
Of course.
Right, but where it just ends up being more people are adept at the GQG way versus not.
Yeah, look, I think the first and foremost of fitting into that is an element of humility. And so some salespeople aren't really trained that way. They're trained to be the center of the universe. And that they can be very, very good at what they do, but it will not fit for us. So I have, I would say, a very long leash and willing to overinvest in people's development technically, right? In terms of getting better at what they do in their craft. I have an incredibly short leash on culture, right? And so if you don't fit and you don't understand what we're doing as a team and how to be a part of that, then you can't be a part of what we're doing.
Could you talk about the culture and the things that you have to do kind of on a daily, weekly basis? Because I live culture. I've put all of our principles on our website. Yeah. I have to own them. I mean, I'm such a culture buyer because people can go other places. And when we started the business, and maybe you could talk about this a little bit about GQG, keeping your best players is obviously what we all want to do, right? But let's just take a step back and say why. And what I learned is when you bring someone on board, in the beginning, it takes 10 hours to do the task. And then all of a sudden it takes 5 hours. Then all of a sudden it takes an hour. Then all of a sudden it takes 30 minutes. And then it takes 10 minutes to get the job done. So there becomes this institutional knowledge of how to get the job done. If you have a lot of turnover in the institutional knowledge, you're in deep, deep trouble.
Yeah. No, it cuts both ways for sure. So we want to obviously have our best people stay and be wildly successful. But I think that when you look at that, and I talk to some of our younger salespeople about this sometimes. So they'll be like, "Hey, I've been here for 6 months now, and like I really feel like I've gotten good at this and I'm making big impact." And I'm like, I'm sure you have. And then I'll talk to them again in 6 months and I say, how much better are you today than you were 6 months ago, right? Because that learning curve is very steep. And everyone says like, yeah, I didn't know anything 6 months ago, right? And so as that builds and builds and builds, the job should get easier. You should get better at it. Our clients should benefit from that. And the team gets stronger over time. And my job is to empower that. My job is also to help people get what they want out of the journey. If they help our clients get what they want out of this journey. And that can be with GQG. And ultimately, I think I hope what my legacy is, kind of like your relationship with Pete, is that people who have been a part of what we do get to go on and do some really amazing things in the industry, hopefully with GQG, but sometimes other places too.
Right. And it seems like what you just said to me is that you really want to make it about helping other people get what they want out of life.
100%. What's the old Zig Ziglar? It's like you can get anything you want if you get as many people what they want, or something like that.
Read a lot of Zig over the years. Love that guy. So funny you brought that up. So do you want to walk through, before, like we were just chatting, outside of the studio, and you mentioned you have your intermediary sales team, you have your institutional sales team. I was going to ask you about sales process. I'm the massive, just to give everyone a sense about how much I believe in sales process, is that our sales team has a 7:45 check-in daily, and then we go through calendar. Good news from the day before. The inside team describes what their 30-second plan is for that day, what cities they're scheduling for. And then our 2 metrics are, and this is on the software side, just to kind of give you a sense. It's the same on the investment side, but I'm only saying this so you can get a sense of how committed we are. Then we have a 5 o'clock check-in against 2 metrics, first-time demos and re-engage. And so it's a whole process. So it's 10 check-ins. One guy looks at me and I told the story, he goes, "Boy, you must be Mr. Popular." And I said, what's funny is that if you ask the team what's their favorite part of the day, and they would do personal videos in the studio, they'll say it's the 7:45 check-in. Yeah. So I'm such a big believer, and I know you are, and I remember 5 years ago that was the case. Can you tell us the difference between, because you're just talking number of accounts and such, the differences between the institutional team sales process and then how you relate that to the intermediary sales process?
Yeah. So look, for us, we have a core set of products, so 4 core strategies that we're out with one investment team. So the message between our groups is incredibly similar, right? So what we're out telling any advisor versus any institution is nearly identical. So it's not really about your ability to message something differently, although there can be small things around taxes or things like that, right? But it's really not about that. It's really more about the prioritization effort that you have to go through. So in institutional world, like give or take, there's roughly probably 1,000 points of contact in the US where you could actually meet with them and influence a decision outside of kind of getting to board members or something like that, which is, not much of what we do. So that's really, you could call all of them in 2 days or something, right? Like that's not really that big. It's really getting them to pay attention. And so that's really about depth and how do you set up a process that encourages depth. And then in our intermediary side, where there's 280,000 advisors in the US,
right?
You could spend your time talking to the tens of thousands of advisors that are complete and utter lack of fit for what you do. That's not a good use of anyone's time. So the front end for our advisor team and process is really about prioritizing who you should be talking to. And then beyond that, whether you're an institutional intermediary, what are you going to tell them that's convincing? And what's your process to take them on a buying journey? And I think for the average advisor that we work with or institution, certainly it's kind of median and up in size. And they want to go on some sort of buying journey. They're not going to sit down with me and I have some special sauce that I sprinkle on it and go, "Oh, wait, there's more." And then they're like, "Oh, well, now that you told me that, I'll go ahead and buy with you." It doesn't work like that. They need to understand what we do in a deep way. And in a lot of ways, I don't like to think about it in terms of sales. I like to think of it in terms of we're educating people on what we do well. And if it's a fit, they'll do what comes naturally in their buying process. Yeah. We take them on that journey. And so process-wise, we do some simple things like every week, we send out a report that's transparent, not just to our sales teams, but to our marketing team, to our CPM team, to our executive team, on exactly every meeting that was done for the week, where everything is at in a pipeline, where we're at on metrics, across a variety of ranges, all the ones that matter to us. It's completely transparent. There is no place to hide. And then each individual team has a different cadence of individual meetings, both with manager and with group, to share that feedback, and then different individual reports. So like our internal desk has a weekly metric report that, really shows where they rank, frankly, to their peers on a weekly basis and relative to what we think is the minimum standard. Yeah.
I want to get back to the metrics because I can already tell you're not an activity guy for activity's sake. It's very transparent against what matters most. Yeah. Is my interpretation. But let's get back and let's unpack the depth a little bit more because when we teach our Rainmaker class, the basic point number 2, the pillar number 2 is bring the story to life. So you have to become a master messenger. Yeah. And so you're training around depth of your institutional team, right? We're selling complex products, right? And the genius is, can you take a complex product and make it simple to understand? Yeah. And if you can do that in fewer meetings, because you're really depth, you have great skill at doing that to that depth. Can you just talk a little bit about that? I think that's kind of the lost art that people don't understand is the education process and really bringing that due diligence analyst along. I'd say the best can do it faster, but not skipping any parts of it.
All right, so you touched on some interesting stuff. So one is, I'll try to rephrase what you said. I think there's a big difference between giving someone the facts and telling someone a story with the facts. And that's what we try to help people do over time, right? It's a complex product at the end of the day, right? Everything that goes underneath of the investment process and picking stocks and building portfolios and risk management, all those things can get pretty mundane pretty quickly. So how can you help people understand in a simple way? And I believe, to my core, whether it's a small advisor or a mega institution, within the first 15 minutes of meeting you, they make a decision about whether this is worth their time or not.
Right.
So if you can't get to the point in the first 15 minutes about what you do well and why it might be a fit for how they invest a portfolio or help their clients, you get an uphill battle from there in a big way. So that's a lot of the training that we're trying to do on our message and our education around industry and the markets and everything else. That's an ongoing thing. And nobody is immune from that. I don't care how senior you are on our team. When we do those training exercises, everyone participates. And no one is left out. So it's not a way to kind of like pick on junior people or underperformers.
Well, you really talked about something that is near and dear to my heart, is that when we're storytellers, right? Absolutely the best for the storytellers, but you're never selling to the end buyer, at least the institutional level, maybe at the FA level, but that means the product's probably already been approved, right? So that means you have to tell a story. And when you get up when you leave the conference room and that person goes back to their colleagues, you say, hey, what does Edgewood do with Gui, right? What does GQG do? Yeah. And if they can retell the story, like, look, it's an amazing business. I love this strategy, and here's why. Because you told a story that can be retold.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with that. I mean, the vast majority of the time, you are not engaging a sole decision maker. They have to go and help somebody else understand what you do. Right. And they need to be able to probably do that both verbally and written. So that means your experience of that buying journey that you have to take them on, all those things need to line up between what they hear from maybe the salesperson from the very, very first conversation to what they're going to hear from a CPM, to what they're going to hear from our analyst team, from what they're going to hear from our PMs. Does it match everything that we have in our written material? And is it distilled down in a way that they can turn around and go, okay, I can actually turn that into a report. I can stand up and talk for 10 minutes myself about what this firm does and why it's a great fit for us. And so I try to think about things through that lens, and then you evolve it over time. One of the things that I've seen for us, we started 7 years ago with a blank sheet of paper, and a founder and CIO who had a great reputation. And our original kind of message and the way we talked about things was incredibly similar to how we talked about things previously. If you look at the way we message those things today, it's dramatically different. Same investment process, by the way. But I think we've learned a lot more about and taken feedback from our clients about what they understand and what makes sense. And you kind of make these little evolutions over time, and then you turn around and it's like you've made a huge leap, but it comes one bit by bit.
So consistency of message is obviously critical, right? And that doesn't come overnight. It takes practice. It takes buy-in from the PMs. It takes a sophisticated marketer to be able to understand what they should, because I've always said raising money is pretty easy if you know how to tell people what they want to hear, not in a way to butter them up, but actually the person across from you wants to hear certain things in a certain way, and they don't want to have conflicting answers, right? So it's that preparation. I have this belief that marketers don't understand that if they put this in place, even if you have a ridiculously good investor who's got the performance, they've got the whole thing, if you force them to kind of everyone to fall into line in terms of how you're articulating your message and that consistency, it has an unbelievable outcome. Even though I think an investment, it can have a really great outcome on everything at the firm. And I've seen that with Edgewood because we really have done it very similar to you.
100% agree. And then B, so how do you kind of have a process around that, right? Even which is qualitative in terms of the message. So what we try to do is obviously you train on kind of the basic engagement of how to talk about all elements of what we do. But I would say at any given time, there's 35 to 50 questions that you need to be able to answer really, really well about what we do and as a firm that are not related to what's in the portfolio today, okay? And those evolve slowly over time. And so we are constantly updating that. And every time we have any kind of a messaging new point or an evolution, we memorialize that in written form. we discuss and train on it. I'll give the message. And then we break that down on our individual teams and talk about it again. And then that running list of 30 to 50 is kept. And when we have our bigger sales team meetings, I create a very high pressure environment where people have to answer randomly questions in front of their colleagues and peers. And it's all about a culture of feedback at that point, right? So that you can hear what other people do. And when somebody's falling down, I make other people step in to say, here's how do you do it? And then they give it, and we go around and around. And initially, the first few times people do that's pretty uncomfortable. But over time, kind of to what your point was, what's your favorite part of the day? If I ask people what's the best session that we do at our sales meetings, this will get the highest review.
Yeah. It's brilliant because, you're 100 billion AUM, roughly approximately, as they would say, for compliance purposes. But you have 4 strategies.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're really a boutique to a large degree. I mean, I've interviewed Eric Sutherland on this, and obviously PIMCO has a lot of different strategies. Your ability to be able to just focus in on those 35 to 50 questions is, that's everything. The way I've always posited this for 15 years is that we can have this unbelievable front-end engine to get great meetings. All right, you go to Cincinnati and you're covering all channels in Cincinnati, and it costs $2,000 to get to Cincinnati. But if you get in that meeting with Fifth Third, you get in that meeting with Thor, you get in that meeting with the UBS Corner, advisor, FA, are you connecting, how's your messaging, right? Because you invest all that time, money, and energy in the front end, right? But if you don't do what you're doing, right, which is understanding what are the 35 to 50, I always say in your opening remarks, first 2 minutes, you have 15 to 20 questions you need to get off the table. They're table stakes. So the rest of the time can be focused on talking a conversation about the investment process, strategy, team, risk controls, everything, right? Yeah. So many people, we've taken on strategies, and some of our teammates, I'll be on the call, I'm like, you're asking him a question that should have been answered in our opening remarks.
Right.
Why are we waiting for minute 15 or 20? Yeah. And he's still confused around product structure, what have you, right? How it can be bought and everything, and then that ruins the flow.
Well, it's kind of back to my point of the first 15 minutes of a meeting, right? If you're not teeing that up well, and if their body language kind of hasn't changed and leaning in a little bit to the conversation, then you got work to do, or it's just not a fit. Right. And that's an okay answer too, by the way.
Right.
I'm not trying to convince everybody in the world that we're always the best fit. I think it's really about, can we help people understand quickly, is this worth spending their valuable resources and time on? And sometimes the answer is yes, but not today. And that's okay too. You want to put yourself in that position that when the opportunity does become available, you're front of mind. And so like our institutional business, you're thinking about that a lot. So there's multiple points of engagement. Obviously, research consultants control or kind of gatekeep a lot of the industry. But there's a lot of plans that will have a staff. They're going to look at the research ratings from a consultant, and then they also have a field consultant that really takes care of their account on a day-to-day basis. And we want to educate all 3 of those potential influencers to that process. And you know what? That may not amount to anything today,
right?
But 3 years from now, when they have a search, it's going to mean a lot.
So if we were to now unpack that a little bit, because I think this is what is one of the most fascinating things about purchasing decisions. And then, so now you've educated, right, all these different constituents on a particular strategy. Now you've got the finals presentation where they're presenting, whether you're doing it or they're just doing it to represent you, okay?
Yeah.
But they have to present maybe 2 or 3 options.
Yeah.
If they're more familiar, right, through the education process with your investment strategy than the others, right? Because you've over-communicated, hey, these are the different questions where people can get tripped up, especially when you're presenting to your peers. Like, people don't understand that a due diligence analyst at an RIA literally has to present to the investment committee. And that can be dicey, right? Because if one, they recommend something that doesn't go well.
Right.
Number 2, if they can't answer the questions properly, right? So I always think of it as our job to arm them, right? And if you're armed better than the other sales guy did for the other one, they're going to, right?
Yeah, look, 100%. So if you take allocators or consultants or anybody else, and you just say, hey, like, when we've already won or lost this thing, right? It's already done. But like, tell me behind the scenes, kind of how did the decision-making process go? And some of the stories I've heard about why a manager got selected or didn't get selected for a mandate, can make you shake your head a little bit. And that's just human nature, right? So there's no reason to kind of get frustrated by it. But what it tells you is you need to increase your probabilities to the greatest degree you can. And if 3 groups that influence the decision have familiarity and comfort with you, it doesn't mean you're winning anything, but it means your probabilities probably went up.
Right.
And so that's how we think about it in the institutional world. And the advisor world is no different. It's just not as influenced as always by as many different participants, from a third party perspective in that decision. But the principles still apply.
So you mentioned metrics and principles and everything around communication. I just want to come back to that a little bit around how you communicate both down, if you will, to your team, then how you communicate up, and then just how important that level of communication is to maintain a life for you of the lowest agita possible.
That's good. So let's start with principles. So if anybody who's worked with me would know that I'm a big believer in Ray Dalio's book, Principles, and we write it down that way to think about it. And when we originally started we have our own kind of firm values and principles, but for our team and our group, we've created our own as well from a firm and client perspective, how does that apply to what we're doing? And when we first wrote it all down, it was really to try to help us hire better, to say, hey, here's what we're about. Here's the kind of people we want to work with. How do we identify that? How do we interview for that? And it went from there and became something more than that, which is very much the foundation of what our culture is. So to me, culture is about the principles you believe in and then the actions and consequences that you have around those principles. And so we've got a list of 12 principles that are kind of sacrosanct for us. And I believe a principles list should get longer over time, not shorter. And when somebody gets hired for our team, I don't care how junior or how senior, I sit down, I spend 1 hour with them on the principles. And part of that is a history lesson about why a principle is what it is, because one of the challenges with that, if you say, well, we want to engage with highly responsive people because that's low-hanging fruit, well, who would ever say the opposite, right? So you have to actually put color on why it's important for that to be one of our 12 at GQG. How has that been reflected in our history? How are we addressing that on a go-forward basis? Where is strengths and weaknesses? And some of these things are aspirational. It's difficult to be perfect at any of them.
Right.
And so we're constantly reinforcing that starting on the first week that they're at the firm. At one of our big sales meetings for our global sales meeting around the firm, which is 70 plus people, we take one of the principles once a month. We have someone on the team highlight that principle, both of what it means to them, and then also examples of people on the team that they believe highlight that. It takes 5 minutes. We do that once a month. And then typically at our larger sales meetings twice a year, we are doing some sort of activities and engagement, again, around the principles, just thinking about why does it matter to us? Because if I look at the people that have not been a good fit for our team, they violate one or more of the principles egregiously.
Right.
And so I think it's just common ground for us. And I believe it helps us be better at everything that we do. That's, again, brilliant. I love it. And we walk the talk. So we have 14 principles. They're on our website. And a lot of them, we call them Dakotisms, right? They're very like walk the 8 feet, don't go cowboy. We sell apples to apple buyers. We don't try to convince orange buyers to buy apples, right? We index large cap growth. No, you can do it. No. We index large cap growth. Yep. Okay, I got it. We can move on. So I learned 2 things that we're going to implement that you just went through. Number 1, sitting down with each new hire and going through the principles. So brilliant. We do personal bio videos for every teammate when they join. They're done kind of right behind you in the studio. Roberto and Jamie do them, and they ask them questions. I'm not involved. They ask questions, and they ask, what is your favorite Dakotism, which are our principles, right? And they ask them why, and they go through it. So what you just said rings so true. When you have the principles, a lot of people they eventually vote themselves off the island because they can't meet the principle. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then how about this? The people that buy into their principles and your leadership team, everything, they look at you and go, that person just violated this principle. Yeah. And then you have all the eyes now on you. All right, big boy, what are you going to do? Yeah, look, I mean, as I talk about, I didn't coin this phrase, but I heard it somewhere once. There's a balance that needs to be struck in sales leadership between empathy and justice. And if you really boil that, it sounds a little cliche or whatever, but if you really boil that down and think about what motivates people, but also then creates the right environment, I think it's a balance of those 2 things. And it's having the empathy for how difficult sometimes this this job can be.
Yeah.
How much it can grind you down, how actually competitive it is out there. I mean, everyone's very nice in the industry, but let's make no mistake, this is a wildly competitive industry, right? There's 200 plus products in every category that I operate in. And if you haven't noticed, the whole industry is full of ex-athletes. So, everybody is trying to knock you off your perch at every moment. So it's finding that balance of how to motivate people and understand what they do through positive reinforcement and kind of empathy, but also saying, like, look, that's not acceptable, either in terms of the technical skill or how we behave. And if people can't make the correction, then it's easy. It's actually an easy decision. I don't lose a single ounce of sleep over that.
Our downtown office has everyone kind of under 35. And so there's no manager in any way, shape, or form. And it becomes, and you have these 30, 35 people, all kind of in their 20s, a lot of them first job out of college. Because we have our principles, it becomes a self-governing situation. And if somebody, it doesn't happen much, but if it maybe just is a slight attire or something, right? Some more seasoned person would come over and be like, hey, excuse me, is that what we stand for? And, which is great because it's a wake-up call. What I've learned now at 56 years old, the principles really do matter and they really do drive behavior. And it's amazing because I've had a few situations where all the eyes were on me when a principle was violated. And within 24 hours, I had to just take a deep breath. I had to verify some facts. And then you're like, okay, got it.
Look, not every principal violation is a capital offense, right? There's small offenses.
Yeah.
And I find one of the things that's powerful is just the vulnerability of admitting the mistakes. And so whether that's my own as a leader, I try to admit that openly when I make the mistakes and get better at it. But when there are members of our team who maybe we have teaching moments with to say, hey, look, let's turn this into a positive. Why don't you come on our team meeting or our global call or whatever it is and just talk about that through the lens of the principle. This is the mistake that I made and what I learned from it. And suddenly something that, you felt not so great about, you help the team get better from and you turn it around.
That's great. I love your communication style and leadership style. So I want to transition for a sec into something that's near and dear to my heart. I know it's near and dear to your heart is Salesforce.com and a CRM.
Yeah.
And I really would love from a high level to tell me at the end of the day, what impact do you believe the value of usage of a CRM and a CRM in general? Because it runs our business. Yeah. We've never had to use the word adoption ever at Dakota. Right. So I know where I'm going with this, but could you just sort of comment on that as a CRM and the power of it?
Yeah, no, of course. Well, look, from our team, if it's not in the CRM, it didn't happen. Is the starting point. And one of the other things I've noticed if I go to conferences or whatnot, and there's obviously people in the industry investing tremendous amounts of money in trying to improve their data and how their CRM works and all those kind of things. And everyone has a lot of pleasantries to say about that. And then, if I'm having a drink or meal with a peer in sales leadership, usually it's like, there's some struggles. It's kind of the challenge of that. And look, it's ridiculously complex. And, I was never trained, in these kind of different technologies and the capabilities. So it's been a lot of learning. We have made meaningful investment there and to try to just make everyone's life easier, right? So if you think about the process of who are we going to talk to, what's the buying process that we then try to take them on, the CRM is the only way to do that at scale,
right?
That I'm aware of. So even if it's just basic, keeping the contact information in an email list and a pipeline, like that's kind of the very basics. And then you say, what other kind of data can you really start bringing into this now? As these systems have evolved, whether it's Dakota data or data that you can purchase from a lot of other places, maybe you're going to incorporate data from your website. Maybe you're going to incorporate buying habits from other third parties. Maybe you're going to put AI on top of all that. And we're doing some of those things and we're aspirational towards others. But the question is, if I make an investment like that, if I can simply make one of our salespeople 10% more efficient, well, okay, 10% on a week doesn't feel like much, but over the course of a year, over the course of 3 years, we've had a lot of success. I feel like when we're in front of people with our message, we've got a pretty good hit rate of finding new clients. So that's very valuable. So everyone's searching for that little bit greater efficiency. And we've had a lot of forward progress from when we launched the business, in which the CRM was basically just a repository for contact data, to where we are today. But I have my frustrations with it too. Just last week we were having some massive frustrations with this thing of, we keep making progress and then we create more challenges. But I think that's the nature of frankly, all of distribution is you've got to evolve what you're doing. You've got to be willing to evolve process, message, technology, all those things. You're dogmatic about what you believe in, but you are flexible about how you can go accomplish it. And like even with salespeople, while I say like there's a machine and there's process and all that's true, people have to be able to find their own pathway. So I feel like there's kind of 100 ways to sales heaven, right. But they've got to fit in the boundary lines.
Yeah. So same with us in terms of, but taking it back to the basic principles, as you just said, all the contact information, but importantly, having that be up to date. Clearly, that's the business that we've put ourselves in for ourselves as well. We had our own cooking. More importantly, like what's more important than that? Getting the meetings that have been scheduled in Salesforce, and of course, meeting notes. But I would even say I would take priority over the meeting that's been scheduled, getting it in. I don't believe there's many leverage points. If a salesperson only has their time, the CRM becomes the number one leverage point. Now, the number two leverage point, or one, however you want to say it, I think there's about 5 that are the master messenger, great storyteller. We've already talked about that. Getting this information in so you can look at your past activity, right? Because time flies. You do all these meetings, follow up in the yellow stickies or Excel spreadsheet and everything has no scale to it. It has no scale to cross-reference to pipeline or anything, right? But when I was at our conference, I spoke about leverage points and I spoke about the power of a CRM. I literally was apologizing the whole time, just assuming I'm telling you guys something you already know. So many of our customers and people came up to me and said, hey, thanks so much. That was so helpful and insightful for how you use your CRM as a leverage point. I'm like, it's how you get from, you said 10%, if you have 10% a week, a month. I say it's the way you can go from 1x as a salesperson average to 2x to 5x to 10x is getting the information in your CRM so that you're one-click follow-up.
Well, it's interesting. So when I hired a head of sales enablement for our team, he's built a small team. And one of his concerns when I was interviewing was like, will you be able to get the adoption? I said, don't worry, we'll get the adoption. So he's had a change of culture from where he was at before. And it doesn't make sense to me to do it any other way. And I think, frankly, that will soon come to pass in the industry because the things that you can do from a marketing perspective now, the ability to target both via email, via social media, et cetera, whether it's advisor, institutional, et cetera, the salesperson's effectiveness is still there, but it's different than it was before. It's not simply about turning over rocks. I can get marketing and social media to turn over thousands and thousands of rocks for me continuously. So the salesperson is really about finding the leverage points, using their knowledge of what we do particularly well, these potential clients, their universe, the markets, everything that's going on in context to get attention and to tell a story, right? And to know where you're at in that process with all the potential people you could be talking to in whatever you cover. Like the CRM is the only way to do that.
And before we just move off this topic, because if you have to manage up to Rajiv, right? And you need and your executive team, imagine how hard it would be, or conversely, how easy it would be. I just want to circle back to a point because you made the point about adoption with your head of enablement and that all get adoption.
Yeah.
It's my belief I'm doing our team a disservice if they aren't playing to the highest professional level. And I would say if you're going to be a sales professional, playing at the highest potential, highest level is to make sure you are utilizing all those leverage points, a CRM being one of them.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're doing your team a disservice if you don't hold them to account to manage the business out of a CRM.
Yeah, look, principle 1 is high standards. So we can start there.
Right.
And then look, it just creates a tremendous amount of transparency, right? So I have a belief about how many kind of opportunities a salesperson should have in a pipeline, and it can vary depending upon what they're covering, but we kind of know what those numbers look like over time. So it should be the first thing I'm looking at with a salesperson, right? I don't really care about how many emails you send out or calls you get. I care about the number of meetings you get and ultimately what that translates into in terms of opportunities for you.
Right.
Right. And those things are very simple to measure. And we can understand them. It doesn't mean that it won't ebb and flow. It will ebb and flow. But it facilitates an easy conversation, and it's a small team. So there's no place to hide. And I use it for transparency reporting up as well. So I send that same report to our entire client-facing team every week. I also send it up. So it's very easy to digest, understand exactly what's going on group by group, and exactly if you want to drill down to the salesperson, you can do that too.
Yep. So as we're kind of coming to the end, I want to cover a few topics. We covered a lot about your leadership style, right? It came through. Are there any comments that you want to make in addition to the comments we've already talked about in terms of how you manage the business?
I mean, look, I think we've covered off, a lot of it. I think I'd go back again to invest in people so that they can ultimately get what they want out of it. But to the degree that they're making it about themselves, then you got to move on.
Right.
And I think if I think back to my whole career, I've worked with some just absolutely fantastic people to be around in this industry. And then you'll also remember typically a few that maybe weren't the most fantastic to be around. Well, what do those ones that weren't fantastic to be around have in common? They were typically very smart, very good at what they did, and very self-centered. Right. And so that's just not how we're going to operate. And that becomes very vapid, right? This industry can be very vapid very quickly because it's like you don't have the same connection to a product for vast majority of our team, right? So you don't have an iPhone that you show somebody how to use, right? And especially if you think about outside of sales and the investment team for our firm, we're 170 odd people. There's only 20 people that pick stocks. Everybody else is in support of that in some way. So you got to figure out why you're passionate to be here outside of like, what's the performance and the fees and what part do I get? Right. Those are just not very fun people to be around. So yeah, I think that's how I would think about, the leadership aspect of it.
By the way, I love that comment you just made about fun. Like work has to be fun, right? You got to make it fun. It can't be, right? It can't be a lot of agita. No, I love that. So speaking of that, so it dovetails perfectly my next question. What advice would you have for a young salesperson entering the investment business in a distribution or sales role?
Yeah. Patience. I think patience. So what I see from a lot of young people that are very talented is they are good at what they do, and they're getting better quickly. And because they see the success of others, either the accolades or the lifestyle or whatever it is, they get very, very anxious about that. And it leads to a sense of entitlement. And that entitlement is going to be the root of disappointment and failure.
Right.
Where it starts, I think, impacting your behaviors. And instead of focusing on the journey of getting really, really good at something and knowing why you want to be there and what you're doing it for, you're too focused on the outcome. And yes, at some point, everyone has to take care of their own career and those kind of things, right? It has to be a two-way decision. But everyone that I hire that's young, I say, look, I need you to give me 3 years where you're just heads down, focused on being the best in the world at what you're doing. And if I can actually accomplish that and say you're one of the best in the world at this, your opportunities here or somewhere else will be unlimited. You won't have to worry about, trying to negotiate with me or anybody else for anything. It will be obvious. And I think that is lost. It's truly lost on a lot of people. I had the fortunate situation. I didn't have any wisdom like that. I had no wisdom when I was young. But I had a set of circumstances where I couldn't fail. And I got on a desk with several others, and literally every one of them was better than me. Right. And it was like, okay, any notion that I'm going to be moving in front of them is not really realistic. So I kind of got to that path on accident where it's like, look, I have nothing else to do but figure out how to write emails better, leave better voicemails, have better introductions, have better conversations, have better follow-up, and do it more times. That's the only way this is ever going to work for me, because I got about $2,000 in my bank account. I got a $40,000 salary and $1,500 a month in rent. So, I've got to figure this out. And that created a journey for me that ended up being powerful. And along the way, the journey became enjoyable.
I really didn't have to ask you about your leadership style because it comes through so well and all that, and all your answers to the question. So congrats on that. And so just to close, given the kind of the current market environment that we're in today, not stock market necessarily investments, but just the world that we live in today, any one or two top challenges that you're sort of eyeing up, and then what you're doing to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, well, look, the data challenge is a real one. We've touched on that a bit. So the ways in which you can take data in and the costs of it and what to do with it and how to focus your team, I think that's a constant discussion for us. Look, obviously the industry is it's quietly under mass disruption, I would say. And a very long bull market with only a few little hiccups, I think, has masked a lot of that for the traditional side of the business, which we set on. And look, we've been able to break that, that mold and do a lot of things to be successful. But, we're not immune either. And so we have to think very carefully about what do our long-term clients look like? What type of product structures really make sense? What type of pricing really creates alignment between us and our investors? And ultimately, this whole thing is a war for talent, whether it's your investment talent, obviously, which is the absolute heartbeat of everything that we do, but across all aspects of the business. That's not going to change. So if I think about what GQG can hopefully be, whether it's starting with the investment team or the team that I manage, it's a home for great talent that would want to come and be a part of what we do, because we want to keep creating value for our clients and investors over time. And the market gets smarter every day. The competitors get smarter every day. And so we've got to continue to evolve.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I just want everyone to know, I thought this was going to be a really good interview. I didn't expect it to be this spectacular. If you listen to this and you break it down, there's literally, nuggets of gold, Steve, all the way throughout everything that you went through. This has been so enjoyable. I can't thank you enough.
Awesome. Thanks, Gui.
You got it. So we conclude another Rainmaker podcast. I can't wait to see you on the next Rainmaker podcast. Thanks so much for watching.
You can find this episode and others on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. We are also available on YouTube if you prefer to watch while you listen. If you would like to check up on past episodes, check out our website, Dakota.com. Finally, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, please be sure to like, follow, and share these episodes. We welcome all your feedback as well. Thank you for investing your time with Dakota.
Hey, thanks so much for joining Rainmaker Podcast. Hope you enjoyed the show, enjoyed the interview. I know I loved it. And hey, if you wake up in the morning and you raise money for an investment firm, you do cold outreach, whether you're a sales leader or salesperson, and you don't know about Dakota Marketplace, we would love to show it to you. It's world-class. It's used by over 880 investment firms and over 3,600 individual salespeople. To learn more, go to Dakota.com and click on a free trial.